of my fondest childhood memories were going to sleepovers where my friends and I would play GameCube games until the sun rose. And one of my favorites was Animal Crossing. To this day, this series holds a special place in my heart, and every once in a while I return to it with a burst of energy fueled by those nostalgic memories, only to drop the game a few days later, but honestly, that's just part of the experience. I've recently restarted my New Horizons island, and one day I had a camper that reminded me a lot of that one NPC from Glorious Masquerade, which led me down a rabbit hole of comparisons that I'll be sharing with you all today. Because honestly, who hasn't thought about which Animal Crossing villagers best represent Twisted Wonderland characters at least once in their life? Since this is going to be entirely based off of vibes, the spoilers will be light. However, there will still be some EN server story content discussed, so plan accordingly. Now then, let's see who is up first in the chaos order. Malleus. All right, so for Malleus, I went with Matilda the snooty kangaroo because I feel like these two have the same sort of aesthetic going on with their dark colors and overall vibe. Snooty villagers tend to be a bit classier than some others and can come across as mean at first, but eventually warm up to you, which I think fits Malleus pretty well. He's also pretty classy and doesn't always understand how his words and actions come across to others, particularly non-Fae individuals, which can make him come across as snooty too. Plus, Matilda is a kangaroo villager, and lady kangaroos in particular can come across as a bit creepy because the little baby kangaroo just mimics everything the adult does, which makes them feel, at least to me, like an extension of the adult to the point where they're of the same mind, kind of like a hive mind type deal. But at the end of the day, realistically speaking, Matilda's just a mom caring for her child. And I think a lot of the folks at NRC hear a lot of creepy things about Malleus. However, if they took a minute to look past those rumors, they'd find a lovely gargoyle loving nerd. I can totally see these two having tea one day and just chatting together, so that's my pairing here. Next up is Azul, who one could reasonably connect to any of the octopus villagers, given their shared cephalopod heritage. And while some arguments may be stronger than others, I think the octopus that best fits Azul is none other than honorary octopus Tom Nook. Listen, at Azul's core, he is a businessman with a business plan through and through. Tom Nook at his core is a businessman with a business plan as well. Plus, he's got two adoptive nephews working for him and helping out with his enterprises, which is a little similar to the two Eel brothers that help Azul out with his dealings. Both claim to be benevolent individuals, but they ultimately are the ones who win in the end, regardless of the dealings, right? At least that's the meme version of Tom Nook, but I don't think you could ever get a loan from Azul that you never technically have to pay back without ever encountering a consequence for that. So. But now, since Tom Nook isn't technically a villager and he doesn't technically count towards being a resident of your town per se, if I had to pick one of the villagers to be paired with Azul, I'd pick Marlowe for the sole reason that he reminds me of that mafia boss shrew from Zootopia, and that fits Azul's vibe all too well. Okay, now for Floyd. I think his villager equivalent would be the jock monkey Tiansheng, solely because Tiansheng is based off of Sun Wukong, a very beloved mythological figure that at first glance may not seem as though he has much in common with Floyd. And honestly, I don't really know too much about Sun Wukong. My only exposure to his character has been media references. But the one thing that I do know for sure is that Sun Wukong is an absolute menace. Dude gets locked under a mountain for hundreds of years because he got up to so many shenanigans. And if that doesn't fit Floyd, the guy who had to be muzzled during Playful Land due to the sheer destructive havoc he wrought on those unsuspecting puppets, I don't know what else could. So while aesthetically these two don't really share that much in common, and the villager of Tiansheng is not a carbon copy of Wukong, the sheer audacity I imagine this villager to have because of that connection, coupled with Floyd's own audacity, is enough to pair them together in my mind. Moving on to Epel, there is one villager I could pair him with that would be funny because Epel always equates to apple. But I actually think, based off of his vibes, Sasha is a much better fit. This is a cute little rabbit with big, sparkly eyes and luscious locks that leans feminine in appearance, but Sasha is in fact a boy. This is extremely reminiscent of Epel's having feminine features while also being a masculine individual, and of the journey that Epel is on to reconcile these two parts of himself. Also, according to the fandom wiki, there is a Han character in Sasha's Chinese name that can mean snow, amongst other things, which in a way also fits Epel being in the Snow White dorm and being heavily tied to that particular fairy tale. Even without this added bonus, these two still have very strong thematic ties, so I can't help but feel that if Epel ever was an existing Animal Crossing villager, that he would be Sasha. Next up is Riddle, who is known in part for being a very angry boy with a short fuse. One might even call him cranky. So his Animal Crossing compatriot is going to be Octavian. He may not be a goldfish, but he is red and he is cranky, and that is enough in my book to place these two together. Octavian also has a permanent scowl of sorts that makes him always look a little intense, similar to Riddle's rather intense attitude towards life in general. And while Riddle isn't an overly angry person, he just has a short fuse, he can be intense with his adherence to the rules and to his way of life, and it can come across in a not so friendly way. This is a very core part of him that I don't think will ever completely disappear, even if Riddle begins to accept a more and more balanced approach to life, which I think slots him into the Animal Crossing cranky archetype well. Outside of physical appearance and the occasional aggravated outburst, these two don't have that much in common. But a pouty Riddle and Octavian put next to one another give me the same vibe, so that's who I've decided to go with here. Deuce, on the other hand, was a bit harder to puzzle out because he's kinda got two things going for him: his softer, friend-protecting side and his aggressive, confrontational, delinquent side. As I was scrolling through the villager list, there wasn't anyone in particular that really stood out to me in either personality fronts for him, so I resorted to the one other connection I could make, and even in the rabbit pool, I was struggling. I finally settled on Doc for two reasons. One, he is blue, which matches Deuce's overall color aesthetic, and the fandom wiki says that in New Horizons, he is the only lazy villager to have the education hobby. Deuce isn't lazy, but he does try really hard to understand academics, even though he consistently does poorly in them. And I think the juxtaposition of lazy and education can, in a way, be connected to this for Deuce. Doc's amiibo card also has him in this shirt that's kind of got somewhat of a checkerboard pattern, which in itself is a Heartstable motif. So that's something too, even if it's not super strong. But you know who does have a very strong connection to Grim? Punchy. Punchy is a lazy cat who loves food. You know who else is a lazy cat adjacent creature who loves food? Grim. Thus, this was a match made in heaven. Punchy also looks a little smug at times, which might just be because of his eyes, which could also be read as tired. But the smug bit fits Grim a bit better since Grim is always tooting his own horn, even when he really shouldn't be, and is so overly confident it's fantastic. Additionally, Punchy's e-reader card, according to this wiki anyways, states that you never know when he might turn claws on you or surprise you with a cat punch, which I also feel suits Grim, since Grim is rather unpredictable and uncontrollable, and while the MC has grown on him and he respects us a bit more than he used to, it's not easy street with this little glutton. And I guess it's not easy with Punchy either, which is a bit wild considering how he is in New Horizons, but I digress. Jack is up next, and I think he's got a similar vibe to Fang. Both of these guys are wolves, have the same fur color, and are a bit cranky. Jack isn't angry like Riddle, so he's not cranky in that way, but boy oh boy is he an absolute tsundere. It certainly takes Jack a while to warm up to us, and Fang is similar in this regard as well. But once you're in their good book, they're both much warmer to you and care a bit about you and your opinions. We can see Jack start to warm up to us towards the end of book 2, but by the end of book 3, we're basically besties. Fang will warm up to you after a few successful requests and perhaps getting to know you a bit more, which I guess that's basically the same thing, right? Plus, Fang usually has on some sort of snowy or icy outfit when you first meet them. And guess who else is from a rather cold area and has winter patterned fabrics in their room? Yeah, these guys are buds for sure. Next up is Rook, who I really wanted to relate to Pave as a callback to the Pokemon video, but there's not too many similarities between them, honestly. So instead, I think Tutu represents Rook much better. According to her Pocket Camp profile, Tutu's greatest wish is to be a world famous cheerleader. Whether you're buying coffee or pulling weeds, she'll be there to cheer you on. Which is so Rook core. This man has an entire hefty photo album dedicated to Nej. He writes the guy's poems to describe his feelings about every little thing that he does. He's got a single-digit fan club membership. Rook is cheering him on in every way possible that he can. And that's not all either, because he's also ridiculously dedicated to Vil and seeing him shine. He moved dorms, joined the science club, and maybe even cut his hair in service of Vil. The haircutting thing is a little more iffy, but if nothing else, he was inspired by him and cheers him on in his own special way. Heck, even during Glorious Masquerade, he, in a way, cheers on Deuce and himself while picking weeds, which is Tutu core for sure. They are both bubbly, bright, and will support you in their own unique ways, and I think that's beautiful. Now, when I first saw Huck the Smug Frog, I knew immediately that this was Ruggie. They've got a similar vibe based off their expressions, and since Huck is of the smug persuasion, he tends to get along with most other villagers, similar to how Ruggie gets along with, or at least remains cordial with, most other folks. Huck also apparently incorporates his penchant for risk-taking in all that he does, which I feel like also speaks to Ruggie since he's willing to take risks and get his hands dirty to accomplish goals. While Ruggie is likely to take way more dramatic risks than sipping coffee through a straw, I do think this tendency ties these fellows together much more strongly than appearances alone. And in a more abstract sense, one could liken a frog to a hyena because, like frogs, Ruggie does a lot of hopping around between part-time jobs, various dorm tasks, and normal school duties, which is a very abstract connection, but I do still think it's quite accurate for him and for Huck. For some odd reason, when I first saw Jock in the list of villagers, despite his French catchphrase and other demeanors, I couldn't help but think that he was an Idia kind of guy. He's a bit too chill and a bit too still living out of his parents' basement to be Rook, but I can kind of see him vibing with Idia a bit. While Idia doesn't quite have the exact same vibe, he is an introverted nerd who doesn't really have a choice but to live with his parents, so they're similar enough to be. Jacques has made his whole personality his hobby, and I think you could also make that argument for Idia too, given his interest and talents for tech. Plus, Jacques' Pocket Camp profile entry says, "Don't let Jacques' pretentious demeanor turn you off. He's actually just overcompensating for the fact he can't down a cold drink without getting a killer headache." And what is Idia if not an opinionated, pretentious nerd who falls apart at the thought of touching grass? With that, I shall rest my case. Moving on to Cater, there are a bunch of peppy villagers that I feel could be emblematic of him, but I eventually decided on Apple because Apple just has a vibe that is on point. Not only is she peppy, but she's got the eyes of someone who's internally screaming, kind of like how Cater is personable and extroverted, but has deeper moments of emotional heaviness. Plus, Cater is our resident social media influencer who is constantly sharing every aspect of his life. Well, every aspect within reason, of course. But Apple is also someone who, and I quote, shares so much, in fact, she's never eaten more than half a sandwich at a time. This is not exactly the same thing, but it is enough for me to draw a conclusion here. So Apple is Cater, and Cater is Apple, and they can snap a bunch of Magikarp picks together, and all can be right with the world. Next up is Vil, who is as graceful as a deer, so it only makes sense for a deer villager to be emblematic of him. And what better deer could there be for Vil than Diana? These two have a very similar color palette and aesthetic sense, and I think that Diana's spa house, at least her New Leaf one, would be appreciated by Vil given how humidified the air must be and how classy the vibe is. Diana is also interested in makeup and about appearances, often coming into conflict with lazy villagers who don't care as much, kind of similar to the dynamic that Vil has with other lazy folks like Leona and his lackadaisical approach to vest buttons. And to top it all off, Diana's Pocket Camp profile states, with those cool, appraising eyes and calm, well spoken demeanor, Diana is every inch the sophisticated lady. Which you cannot tell me does not also describe Vil. Like, if you swap the name and the gender, this is Vil. This is him. This is his elegance. And I don't think there's another villager out there that could match this energy so immaculately, at least to me. Now, Lilia's a bit more difficult to pin down because he's got a lot going on that could connect him with any number of villagers, but ultimately I decided on Cherry, the sisterly dog, since there's a decent amount of overlap between her and our favorite Bat Dad. Both of them have goth-like influences in their design. Both of them care about their friends in an almost familial way. Both of them are a little peppy, and both of them stay up late at night. And if Lilia's Malleus finding capabilities are as good as they seem, then I think both of these individuals will be able to find you in a crowd easily. They're very similar, but still unique, and I can totally see these two hanging out, playing games late into the night, and taking care of Diasomnia together. So for Jamil, I went entirely based on his special magic because Snake Charmer is a form of mind control, and the Hypnotoad from Futurama also has mind control. And Roswell really reminds me of the Hypnotoad, so Jamil's AC equivalent is therefore Roswell. I think this alligator is also one of the few villagers in Animal Crossing who has the potential to start a very concerning cult focused on the stars. And while Jamil has no such intentions, he does technically have the power to start a cult if he wanted to. Plus, my mind wandered into MK Ultra territory with Jamil, which was a big conspiracy thing for a while until it was declassified. And you know what other big conspiracy thing still happens or at least still exists in Roswell, New Mexico? Area 51. Roswell the alligator, obsessed with space? Area 51? Alleged alien spacecraft? Is this all a coincidence? I think not. Aliens, mind control, cults, and delicious shawarma. It's all connected, guys. It's all connected. Anyways, I don't know why my brain went down this route for Jamil specifically, because there are probably a few other villagers who would match his actual personality and talents way better than this crocodile. But I'm now personally invested in the conspiracy theory route, so Roswell and Jamil are my vote for this consideration. Next up is Sebek, who I think most days has the same general expression as Boris the Cranky Pig. Both of these guys are a little prickly and can come across as agitated in interactions, but at their core, they're decent folks with a lot going for them. Cranky villagers are also likely to start competitions with a player, and I think Sebek, always looking at activities as opportunities to train or test his mettle, connects to this aspect well. Sebek is also likely to begin liking a person after they prove their worth to him, which sometimes happens naturally like it does with Marja. I think this villager's personality type functions similarly, and therefore Boris would likely have a similar philosophy. Boris is also known to be really good at supporting folks, specifically with favors and pick-me-ups, which I think is also a little reminiscent of Sebek. Since Sebek is Malleus's guard, he's always around to make sure that Malleus is getting what he needs when he needs it. And even when it's not directly about Malleus per se, Sebek is a reliable sort who will go the extra mile to succeed. I think Boris does the same, just for different reasons, and overall these two just work well together in my mind. Alrighty, we got Trey coming up next, and I think his Animal Crossing equivalent is Bud the Jock Lion. If you made Bud's hair green, these two would basically be the same person. But even as a blonde, Bud reminds me of Guy Fieri, who is well known for his culinary pursuits, just like a certain someone from Twisted Wonderland. This and the glasses and the somewhat laid-back attitude I assume Bud must have because of his choice of decor says Trey to me. But that's where I think the similarities end here because Bud's entire personality is about muscle, strength, and sports, whereas Trey is much more focused on baking and cooking and maintaining peace. However, if you just look at the two in isolation, I think the comparison is quite clear, and I personally feel they go very well together. So that's that here. Silver is in a slightly similar boat, but I think there are a few more factors that tie him to Colton, the smug horse. First and foremost, this picture of Colton makes him look like he belongs in a Disney movie or at the very least a historical drama. Couple this with his stately interior decor and gentleman-like nature, and I think it'd be hard not to connect him to Silver. I also think this pairing is a bit unique compared to the others because Colton being a horse also fits Silver way better than probably any of the other animal types because Silver is in the equestrian club and he handles horses exceptionally well. The only thing that these two don't have in common is their attitudes. Silver is soft, somewhat airheaded, and very considerate, which does not match Colton's egotistical tendencies. However, everything else about these two matches quite well, so I'm quite content equating them. But Kalim was incredibly difficult to pick for because there are so many peppy villagers that could work, and Kalim's equivalent almost had to be peppy because that archetype suits him super well. So it might come as a bit of a surprise that I ended up picking Frobert, the jock frog, for him. However, I don't think you can look at this face and be sad at all. He's so earnest looking, and that just clicked for Kalim for me. And the connection is made even stronger with Frobert's Pocket Camp profile. It states that Frobert's enthusiasm is boundless. Even the most boring occasion will have him singing praises. Whenever you need a boost of self-esteem, he's the one to see. And if that is also not Kalim, then I don't think I understand anything in life, because that to me screams that these two are one and the same. You can even argue that Oasis Maker is the perfect unique magic for a frog who lives in the desert because it would keep their skin from drying out. There are so many little things tying these guys together, and I think together they're a very endearing pair. So that's who I'm going with for this. So now, Ace, who is emblematic of you? Do y'all remember this guy? Cause this is where I see Ace's future going if he doesn't get his act together. Now, Dr. Shrunk isn't unsuccessful per se, but he is about as much of a joke as his act, and while I love him to death, it is a bit unfortunate. While I can't say what Ace's future will be like at this point in time, I can say that he's an excellent performer and smooth talker who's got entertainment down to a science, which reminds me of Shrunk. Plus, the pink axolotl is pink, which is adjacent to red and therefore adjacent to Ace. Unfortunately, Dr. Shrunk can't join your town as a resident, so if I had to pick a resident counterpart to Ace, I'd connect him to Francine the Snooty Rabbit. I don't have any hard evidence for this pick, but I feel like they give off a similar energy, and if I remember correctly, Francine is one of the pop stars featured in Bubblegum KK, which ties into the entertainment aspects of Ace that I previously mentioned. Not only that, but Ace did have his 5 minutes of fame during the SDC, so there's that too. I also don't think he's genuinely peppy enough to be compared to Chrissy, so Francine it is. Now then, for Leona, I think Sid the Cranky Elephant is his proper villager representative. And honestly, I cannot tell you why. Maybe it's because of the side-eye glance he gives you, or his punk aesthetic, or his cranky nature, but for some reason, I just get Leona from him. More so than from any of the actual lion villagers, which is wild, but apparently that's just how my brain decided to work. I suppose if there were anything to connect the two aside from the cranky punk side-eye-ness of Sid's design, it's that Sid is often holed up in his room rocking out to punk music. Now, Leona doesn't hold up in his room specifically, but given that he's always napping and treats the botanical garden like it is his room, I think it's enough to make a connection here. Next up, though, is Ortho, who is without a doubt Ribbot the Jock Frog, because not only is this frog a robot, he is also one of the smaller villager types, which I think fits Ortho since he is also a robot and Idia's little brother. Ribbot is also rocking the blue stripe in this photo and a blue sweatshirt that's eerily similar to the blue of Ignihide. Plus, you know how we all love gotcha games? And you know how Idia at time references gotcha games? And how Ortho likely has a good understanding of them? And how both Idia and Ortho are in a gotcha game? Well, this little frog's Japanese name is Gotcha, which is more a reference to the metal sounds than gotcha games specifically, but it is still another connection to Ortho. The interior of Ribbot's house used to be space-based, and Ribbot also has deep feelings. Really deep feelings, just like Ortho. These two vibe so well, and I think they'd get along well if they met, so Ribbot gets to rep Ortho. Now, last but not least is Jade, and Jade is a rather prim and proper gentleman, so I think the prim and proper Lionel fits him very well. They are both elegant, refined, and care, although it can come off either worryingly or dishonest, but it is care nonetheless. And somehow, both of these guys have a shocking side to them that once you do see it, you can't unsee it. Jade's a little sadistic and will say some concerning things here and there just to get a rise out of people. Lionel isn't sadistic, but somehow, for some reason, in the Happy Home Designer DLC, he wanted me to design him a vacation home that was exclusively toilets. He wanted his entire house to be a bathroom, and I don't get it. Why? What? It was so jarring to me given how refined he is otherwise that I don't understand, but I can also easily see Jade making this kind of request just to see what your reaction is, and that has cemented these two together for me. And there you have it, all the main Twist cast Animal Crossing counterparts according to me. Of course, I must ask, do you agree with my list, or do you think there are better Animal Crossing villagers to represent the Twist boys? Are you going to be adding any of these animals into your towns or islands, or have I ruined them for you forever? Let me know down below, and while you're there, also let me know if you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it. If comments aren't your thing, you could also let me know with a like or a subscribe, but whatever you decide to do, I'm grateful for the support. And before you go, I do just have to remind you that you're amazing, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Oh, you're still here. You really watched to the end, huh? Well, as a reward, here's a little flash round. Jenya is totally Bob the lazy cat because the vibes are just so immaculate between them. Nej is absolutely Fauna, the normal deer, because he really does seem like the embodiment of a normie, but is also surprisingly graceful. Cruel is Labelle because he's not as snooty as Gracie, but he is a fashion designer, and I think he's well known enough to deserve an NPC. However, otherwise, he'd be Portia, the snooty dog. Train is totally Beardo, the smug bear, because look at how prim and proper these two are. They probably have long discussions about the state of the world over tea and biscuits, and I love that for them. Vargas is Biff the jock hippo, because hippos, on the whole, are terrifyingly powerful creatures, and Biff just fits the color scheme and vibe of Vargas. Sam is Eugene the smug koala because these both have some seriously cool dude energy, and Tom Nook was already taken by Azul, and Crazy Red is too much of a shyster to even be in the same thought as Sam, so Eugene it is. And finally, Crowley is Pietro the sheep because they are both clowns. Okay, bye!